trillion things are made of cells. And you as a human are made up of trillions of cells. Now most of those cells are specialized. That means they have a particular job that they're really good at doing. So you look at all those cells, most of which are specialized, they're going to make up your body, the structures and functions of your body. And they're going to work together to make sure everything in your body is going just fine, helping to maintain your life. Now the processes that occur at the cellular level provide the energy and the basic structures that humans need to survive. But what we want to look at a little bit is what might go wrong at the cellular level and how that might actually impact your overall health, well-being, maybe even matters of life and death. So take, for example, a college girl named Brittany. Let's say she's out partying and she's drinking a lot of alcohol. She takes some ecstasy. The next morning she's trying to get over her hangover. She's drinking lots of fluids. But then all of a sudden she just faints. Her roommates get nervous. They take her to the emergency room. The emergency room doctors find out that her blood pressure is elevated. They find out that her sodium and potassium levels are really low. They find out that she's retaining a lot of water because that's one of the side effects of ecstasy is water retention. It kind of raises her blood pressure, dilutes her sodium potassium concentration levels so that she's muscles aren't working well, her nerve cells aren't working well, and in this case, she's unconscious. So the ER nurse takes a look at some research to see how ecstasy has been increasing in use over time. And maybe even noticed this disturbing trend of this increasing in use, and because of that, increased visits to the emergency room. So what are some things that ecstasy does, and how does it affect the human body? Let's take a look.
Serotonin transporters are responsible for removing serotonin molecules from the synaptic cleft after they have done their job. Ecstasy mimics serotonin and is taken up by serotonin transporters. In fact, ecstasy is more readily taken up than serotonin itself. This interaction with ecstasy alters the transporter. The transporter becomes temporarily confused and starts to do its job in reverse. The transporter starts transporting serotonin out of the cell. The excess serotonin becomes trapped in the synaptic cleft. As a result, it binds again and again to the receptors, overstimulating the cell. Ecstasy affects serotonin pathways responsible for mood, sleep, perception, and appetite. Ecstasy also indirectly interacts with the reward pathway. The excess serotonin stimulates a milder release of dopamine along the reward pathway, giving ecstasy slightly addictive properties.
So you can see some of the effects of ecstasy on the cellular level, right? Where it's interfering with the serotonin, the neurotransmitters in that nerve cell. But the problem is a cellular one. It's on the cellular level, which ends up affecting the whole person. So let's take a look at cells in general and the cells in your body specifically. So you didn't start out with these trillions of specialized cells. You start out mostly as stem cells, which are cells that can eventually become very specialized. But at this point, stem cells are very generalized. They can do or become almost anything. Kind of like you, when you were in kindergarten, you're like, I want to be a carpenter. And then you grew up and got to junior high, and you're like, I don't want to be a carpenter. I want to be a lawyer or a doctor. And then you got to high school and you realize that that would be a lot of schooling and very expensive. And you're like, maybe I'll be an engineer or a rocket scientist. And you pick your career, become more and more specialized as you get older. Similarly, stem cells start out with a lot of potential to become a bone cell or a blood cell or a muscle cell or a nerve cell. And then they go through this process that we refer to as differentiation, and they become a very specific, specialized cell. In the world, there's two basic cell types. There are prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are very simple and typically are things like bacteria, single-celled organisms. Eukaryotic cells are plant cells and animal cells. So let's take a look at some of the basic differences. One of the differences is that prokaryotic cells are simple. They do not have membrane-bound organelles. That means that the cell itself is surrounded by a plasma membrane, but inside the parts of the cell, the organelles of the cell, they don't have a plasma membrane. So the DNA is scattered throughout the cell. The ribosomes are in there making proteins. The cytoplasm is this jelly-like fluid that makes up the cell, but there's not a whole lot to it when you compare it with a eukaryotic cell. So take a look at a eukaryotic cell. So here's an example of eukaryotic cell. Notice how complicated it is. In fact, maybe take a couple of minutes to study the cell structures with their functions. So eukaryotic cells have membrane-bound organelles. That is, the things inside are surrounded by membranes and, as a result, are very distinct. So let's take a look at how we might sort out some prokaryotic features, compare them to eukaryotic ones. So a plasma membrane, definitely something that both will have. Both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells have a plasma membrane. A nucleus, a distinct, clear nucleus, only a eukaryotic cell is going to have that. Both will have ribosomes. Only eukaryotic cells will be covered with cell membranes. Prokaryotic cells have no distinct nucleus. They also have no distinct membranes internally. Eukaryotic cells tend to be animal cells, and prokaryotic cells tend to be bacteria. Now, both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells will have a cell wall because plants are eukaryotic and plants have a cell wall. Here's how I remember it. Think about yourself getting ready to go to work in the morning. You come downstairs, you go to your kitchen, you open your pantry, you find a box of Quaker Oats, you grab a handful, stick it in your pocket, you run out the door. And as you're going through your day with the Quaker oatmeal in your pocket, you carry oats. And you as a human are a eukaryote. You're a eukaryote. Now the cells in the human body are specialized, and they perform a specific function. So don't think that all cells are just this nice round cell shape. But remember that cells are going to have different shapes depending on their functions. Those structures are going to be modified so that they can do their specialized activities. For example, nerve cells are very distinct from muscle cells. But take a look again at some of these parts of the cell. Notice how this generalized cell has all these organelles with all these different parts, and each part has a specific function. If that cell needs, let's say, more energy, it might have more mitochondria. If that cell might need, let's say, more protein, it might have more ribosomes. So let's take a look at some of Brittany's cells, our college student. Which organelle will be responsible for detoxifying her body? So typically the liver is the organ where detoxification takes place. But what organelle in the liver cells would be important to get rid of some of those toxins? In this case, it's the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. What about the organelle making proteins? Well, ribosomes are the protein makers. They get the message from the DNA which proteins to assemble. Storing things like extra water, because she's retaining a lot, would be the job of the vacuoles. Providing the cell with lots of energy would be the mitochondria. So like muscle cells or brain cells might need lots of mitochondria because they require lots of energy. The mastermind of the cell, the control center of the cell, is the nucleus. Now, the endocrine system makes hormones, so the cells in the endocrine system need to package those hormones and make sure they get to the right destinations. It's the Golgi apparatus, the Golgi complex, that does packaging for things and making sure they're marked properly so that they'll reach the correct destination in your body. White blood cells engulf a bacteria, and then the organelles in the white blood cells will attack the bacteria and destroy it. Those organelles are lysosomes filled with enzymes that can break things down. Unfortunately, sometimes those enzymes just get released into the normal cell, and the cell dies because it's being broken down by its own enzymes. And that's one of the problems with Tay-Sachs. Let's take a look at an actual picture from a very powerful microscope of a cell. And let's look at some of the parts. Like this dark part right here, that's where all the DNA is. That's the nucleus. You can see the mitochondria, this kind of peanut shape with these folds on the inside called cristae. You can see the Golgi complex. It kind of looks like a stack of pancakes. You can see the cytoplasm, this jelly-like material that fills the cell. And you can see the plasma membrane, this membrane that surrounds the cell. I just want to emphasize again that not all cells are nice and round and generalized. Some cells are specific, and because of that, they might look odd. So here's our nerve cell. It still has a nucleus, mitochondria, ribosomes, endoplasmic reticulum, and most of the rest of the organelles. But the shape is kind of funny because it has this long extension called an axon. That axon transmits nerve impulses and signals to other nerves and places in the body. So nerve cells are designed so that they can properly perform a very specialized function. Other cells have that same kind of characteristic. For example, blood cells don't even have a nucleus, but they do have a lot of surface area on the plasma membrane for carrying oxygen. Sperm cells have lots of DNA in them. They also have this long flagella that makes them very mobile and helps them get to fertilize the egg. Muscle cells are unique because they're the only cells able to contract. Part of the cytoskeleton is these long fibers called actin and myosin. They can pull that cell together and cause it to contract, a unique feature of muscle cells. So if we were going to match up some of these structures and functions, highly mobile would match up with sperm cells. Sending information would match up with nerve cells. Contracting is a unique characteristic of muscle cells. And carrying oxygen is something that blood cells are good at doing. So your body made up of trillions of cells, but those cells are specialized. The organelles in those cells might vary a little bit because they're specialized to do certain jobs. The shapes of the cells might look very different because they're specialized to do a certain job. Those cells started out as stem cells, differentiated to become these specific cells so that your body can do all kinds of amazing functions. And if those functions are disturbed at the cellular level, it might have dire consequences